friendly discussion points. We want to talk about topics and details that are not usually talked a lot about online, in our opinion, and they are essential parts of doing research. So I think many of you, maybe all of you here, are already working on research projects in machine learning, in NLP, or you want to get started working. So our goal is to give you information with expert people in the field about these particular topics that are maybe not as glamorous, but very necessary to do good research. I'm Marzieh. I'm a research scientist at Cohere for AI, and my background is on machine translation. I've been working on different research projects at Cohere for AI for the past 2 years on various topics, from building multilingual models like the AI initiative to different works on safety, evaluation, and synthetic data in language models. I'm joined today by Jay, and we'll see whether Shayne can show up as well or not, but we can already start. So Jay, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, delighted to be here. So yes, I'm Jay. I've been writing about machine learning a good 10 years. I'm a software engineer by training. I've been at Cohere for maybe 3-4 years, doing a lot of different things, setting up a lot of the education, developer relations. This year, I'm working more on the research side, specifically focusing on things like code generation, retrieval augmented generation, code generation and retrieval augmented generation, like these two capabilities of the models. Also been working on a book called Hands-on Large Language Models that came out about a month ago. So you can find that, and it's highly visual. I'm really excited to talk about visualization of topics in this discussion, sort of where it fits with scientific communication. But excited to be speaking with all of you about this topic.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for coming here. So yeah, we want to talk about scientific communication, and that can mean a lot of different things depending on where you are in your journey of like your research project, but also like as a researcher. So communication essentially can start from the idea that you have in your mind about something, and how to communicate that to your collaborators, to find people who are interested on the same topics. And it can go to just like doing the research and then communicating that to the world, like really your findings, your results. And that can also come in different formats, like writing, oral presentation. So today we want to talk about from both Jay and my experience in presenting different and working on different machine learning projects, like what are the challenges, like what are some good tips and hints about just like how to do effective and productive scientific communication. Feel free, like Ariel said, to ask your questions in the chat, and we'll also go through them as well. So I actually want to start, Jay, by asking you about the starting point of, let's say you have an idea, and you want to collaborate with some people. What do you think would be like really essential in what you communicate with your peers in this field?
Yeah, it's a great question. So communication, definitely there are like multiple areas in the process where it fits in. For me, even before communicating with others, doing things like writing really helps me understand what problems and also synthesize the research that I'm reading, even before sort of having a specific idea. So if we're to take it to, let's say, chronologically, people think about communication of after they've done research, how they can sort of communicate the work and disseminate it. But it comes in much earlier in the process in terms of crystallizing your understanding. I do a lot of writings with me being the first beneficial of sort of thinking clearly and understanding clearly. And Some of the writing that I would put out and publish, like the majority of it, or maybe if not almost all of it, was just for me to understand the topic that I'm really interested in. So if my curiosity is dragging me to a place, and researchers would find this out, that if they're interested in a field, they go and start reading the papers. And in the beginning, it's kind of intimidating. At least I feel, let's say, learning something new is very intimidating. You don't know the lay of the land there. But then after you know it a little bit, you start to build some comfort. I'm very attuned to that discomfort and sort of building that comfort. But I go through that process by sort of drawing a map or illustrating the concepts. And then putting it out there is helpful for people in general, because others who want to learn the process. And so that, for me, also, one thing that comes into this is building visual language to describe the topics that we're sort of talking about. And those can come in handy when talking with other researchers and sort of explaining the main idea to them. So yeah, definitely it comes in very early in the process.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we should spend a good amount of time in this session talking about the visual elements and like how like successful communication with visual elements. That's a really important aspect. I love what you mentioned about writing. I think even like writing that you don't share with anyone, but just like forming your hypothesis or like your wording of the problem, I also find that really helpful. And it's like a form of, for me personally, also like essentially the first stage of getting the idea out there, like an attempt to getting the idea out there on a paper for myself, and then see how to shape that to share with my collaborators. I see Shayne is joining us. Thanks for joining us. So maybe Shayne, do you want to quickly introduce yourself before I throw you the next question?
Yeah, sure. Sorry I'm late. I didn't see an invite link, so I panicked about 10 minutes ago, but glad to be here. I'm a PhD student at MIT in my 4th year, and I focused on a range of sort of more core fundamental language model training, pre-training problems, and pivoted a little bit towards data and policy and copyright, and larger audit work, I'd say, of the ecosystem. And so obviously, when you're dealing with a range of ideas, you need to be able to communicate them well and succinctly to policy audiences where they might not understand all the technical jargon. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this panel and thinking through how to maybe do that effectively.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Actually, I do want to ask you about many of your recent works are collaborations with a huge number of people, and I imagine also from like different backgrounds at different levels of seniority. How do you think approaching these people differently when you want to pitch them the same idea? Like how do you form your pitch essentially for different people?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I'll give a little bit of background. I used to work at Apple, where there weren't many, it's more of a siloed company in the machine learning space. And so there weren't many collaborators that were interested in the same things that I was interested in. And I was on more of an applied team. And it was during COVID, so it was sort of difficult in many ways to find collaborators in person or in the same city or, do things. So to solve that, I kind of realized that, maybe we should just be reaching out to people individually and people that we'd love to work with, that were interested in their work, and sort of just ask them about what they're up to and see if they're interested in collaborating. And so I honestly think that's the #1 thing that people don't do enough in this community. If there's a researcher you think is great, another PhD student, another institution, doesn't matter if you don't go to the same institution, like reach out to them, see if they are interested in the same thing. And that was really helpful for me to sort of shape what I was interested in and learn from folks and figure out what's a good research direction and what's not a good research direction based off of, I think Jay was already saying this, when you're entering sort of a new area and you don't have a good idea, the best people to talk to are those that are already experts. So with collaborators, it was sort of just finding people with common interests. And then once we got some momentum with the Data Provenance Initiative, we would talk about the work that we were doing, and like many other people are interested and want to join on. And we wanted to develop a way, kind of like Cohere, for others to sort of contribute and get credit. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, no, that's a good point, and I love the, like, you actually felt the need at Apple to do this, so that's really cool. I want to ask Jay, kind of like similar, but for like a larger audience. So not necessarily collaborators, but just audience from different levels of expertise in the topic. So how do you adjust what you want to communicate for different levels?
Yeah, I do find that this is, let's say, not very well understood or described or discussed a lot. And it's something definitely that a lot of people have to come up with their own methods of doing it. I find trying to make the idea accessible to as many as possible is a useful thing. But it's also a difficult thing. It's not easy to write these kinds of guides. So it really depends on the idea that you're trying to do. And in the domain of research, I've tried to break down some of the analysis here of saying a research paper needs to communicate a very specific thing to a specific level of experts. But another artifact that is also useful is articles that explain this paper, for example. And these two serve two different audiences in completely different ways. And then there are things that, closer to that second article, is the Twitter thread that the researcher would then use to sort of publicize their paper. That's another artifact of writing and of communication that in the last 3-4 years has been sort of more and more in what people would put in, and how they would frame that is also a little bit different, because if that is not done in the right way, it might be just lost, and people can't sort of find it or can't give it the attention that it needs. So I find there's this one way of, let's say, how.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I'm wondering, for the room, like, which do you find harder actually, when you write your paper, then like write the blog post or like the article for your paper and the Twitter thread? Like, what do you think is the place that you struggle? Shayne, you want to go first?
I'd love to hear Jay's answer to this as well. But I love that sort of graph that you showed. I would say that for me, the hardest is always the one sentence, and then the tweet, and then the LinkedIn post, and then the one pager. But in an attempt to do what Jay was describing, I love to go in the opposite direction. So as you're writing a research paper, you kind of want to write and document as you go. I think you want to, as you're writing doing the methodology, you write it down. As you pick your hyperparameters, you put it in a table. As you get results, you stick it in there. As you think about them, you write your thoughts. But then there's a process whereby a lot of that is going to migrate to the appendix. And it's sort of a triage approach. Like, you want to have, take all your results and condense that into one page, then into one paragraph, then into like, what's the one bold sentence or the caption that's going to tell people something, or the caption on the figure. And then they can always go deeper into the paragraph, the page, the appendix. But I think there should be that piece where people can start at one sentence. And if you can't describe your work in one sentence, then like think harder about it, or you're trying to fit too much in. Don't let it be 2 sentences. But I go in that reverse direction where I distill it again and again and again. And sometimes you have to leave it for a week and come back and be like, I didn't need to say all that. I kind of forget what all, this is the one thing that like is encapsulated. But I think that the most important, hardest part, to answer your question, is the shortest version.
Yeah, I would say the LaTeX is the hardest for me in nailing that code down. But then, yeah, I would agree with Shayne. Like, when you're beginning or when you're following, there's so many questions that come up to you, and you pursue a lot of them. But then to condense the main sort of central concept that brings all of this together feels like you're killing so many of your babies that you're sort of things that you're passionate about or things that you find interesting to sort of there's always guilt associated with throwing all of that away for one or two central sort of ideas, and that is emotionally difficult, it feels like.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of the same, like the shorter, the more constraint of space we have, it's just like isolating that one. For some works, I find it easier to do. For some, it's really more difficult. Another thing that I think for me personally is something I'm trying to get better is just adjusting the level of technical details, essentially. Like I go like in both directions. Like sometimes I feel like it now is just too broad and like too hand wavy, but in an attempt to make it more accessible, I just go a bit too much, and then I have to come back. And a really good thing is just feedback from my peers, like my collaborators in the project. That's usually like multiple eyes on the same essentially tweeted thread. That really helps to balance this, but yeah, definitely first try. I don't get these right either. I love to also hear from our audience. Post in the comment whether what you find easy, what you find harder to do. So my next question, actually, we talked about writing a paper and just this communication, and we often hear that there's also like a lot about storytelling in writing an academic or like a technical paper that is important. So what do you think, in your opinion, like this role of like the narrative or storytelling in presenting complex machine learning research questions? It's for either of you.
I'll leave that to Shayne, actually.
I can take a first stab. This is a great question, Marzieh. I'm glad you sent it to me in advance because I spent a long time thinking about this. And I feel like when we do it, it's actually really effective. So I was giving a machine learning talk on the effect of the time at which you collect pre-training data on how well it scores different evaluations. And when I told people the results or the findings, they're kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense, predictable. So I started asking people before I told them results. I said, okay, here's the problem. Here's what we did. What do you think are the results in this evaluation? And when we did that, the room would be scattered. There'd be people giving different views, like they wouldn't have like the idea. There's not sort of the hindsight confirmation. And so when you tell the story of how you sort of approach the problem and ask them to answer the question for you, they realize the difficulty and the contribution, the importance of that, and then you tell them, and they're along the journey with you. So this is more in the talk format, but I found that to be a really helpful tool. And so now I take polls in the room half the time I give talks to like ask them what they think. I showed you the question, now what do you think the answer is, or how do you think the best way to do it is? And I think it's really interesting as well.
Get people invested in, like, just have an opinion beforehand to also just like get them engaged. Nice.
And maybe you learned something too from them. So
yeah, I would say like understanding or grasping the threads of the work and the discourse around the topic online and in the community is useful for this. It sort of dictates or help sort of nudge the language that you then use in the tweet, for example. So having a sense of the conversations around these topics is always sort of helpful. It's let's say difficult to do if you're not attuned to how are people talking about these topics on social media, in Reddit, on Twitter. Like having a sense of that, I think is usually helpful to just understand the state of mind of how people are thinking about the topic, and then where you introduce sort of the work that you're say continuing that discourse on the topic.
And do you think, does that change from one topic or like one project to another, or like do you have like kind of like the same theme or like the same routine or like pattern? I know it's a maybe like a retrospective type of question, just thinking about.
Let me send that your way. What do you think?
I don't know. So I find, so for me, like when it's very clear when a paper, the authors are really good at storytelling. Like it's just when you read the introduction, it just, even if you are not interested in the topic, it makes you curious and interested about what they did and what they found. For me, I think it's a combination of, so there are like some, I guess, themes that I'm myself passionate about, and I usually woven into like how I write a paper. But then also like per topic, I feel like there's like a different angle that might be interested or like might be. So I try to find that by just checking, like you said, kind of the online Discord of like what is the current, like how people are feeling about this, like how and try to get that involved into the writing so that maybe like people would be more interested. Because to be quite frank, there are a lot of papers coming out every day. It's really important to make your work stand out, like to make it memorable, and trying to find these points of like what people care about to connect to your work. I think that's something that can help.
To add to that great point, Marzieh, I feel like with writing, one of the best things I was ever taught by collaborators at Google who are very good at writing papers was stop using your abstract, or when people ask you the point of your paper, what you did, or you know, when people write their abstract or they describe what they're doing, they love, their first reaction is to say, oh, we did a comprehensive study, an analysis, an examination. And they don't want to describe what they did. That's almost like, I'm going to say, the majority of all abstracts. And I think that people need to put down that that instinct and tell people what they found. And it's so much more powerful because, you know, you get bored when you think, okay, you did a big study, you know, so what? You examined all these things, you explored that, but like, what did you actually find? And that should be the headline. That should be the thing that is 80% in my mind of an abstract, and then leave the methodology to talk about what you did and how you did it. And so when it comes to compelling writing and telling a story, I think it's like the exploration of the results and the impact more so than like the fact that you did the experiment. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it should, like, you should have been doing comprehensive experiments, but like you don't have to highlight that. Like that's it's not that to say you shouldn't have done that, but it's really, it should be a given, and then focus should be on what you find and like what is, because that's also like the starting point of the next, like if I'm reading this paper, like that's where I start to do the next work building on top of that. So yeah, I agree. That's really, really important. So talking about writing papers, a big factor of that, and in my opinion, making papers memorable, is the visual aids of the paper. So like the plots, the diagrams, and it's very like, there's like two aspects of it. So one is, of course, communicating the results. The other is do that in like the best possible way, like if it makes sense. Like you can have like the same plot that shows like the same pattern that you want to see, but then you can also do that like visually appealing and just like try like maybe more creative ways of communicating that to make it more memorable and not just like yet another bar plot, let's say. And I know I'm very happy actually both of you are here, because I think both of you have done really memorable visualization work. So Shayne, I think your paper in the pre-trainer's guide to training, I think the plots in that paper is amazing. Also the data provenance paper. I think those are really nice, really out-of-the-box way of thinking about how, and really visualizing a lot of data points there. And Jay, I think, I don't know if I should, everyone knows your blog post, classic. I think the second year of my PhD, your transformer blog post was just like what everyone was using to understand the transformer paper. And it had your, like, there was this signature of like visualization that stayed, and like it's very memorable for everyone. So I first want to ask you about how, both of you, what is your process? Where do you get involved in thinking about how to visualize something that you're working on for your paper or for your book? Is it by the end of the process or throughout the process you think in those visual space? Who wants to go first?
So it's a different context, but I think it definitely adds to it. So yeah, like in my blog, the blog posts on Transformer, GPT, the visualization a lot of the times is how I understand and begin to understand the topic. And I would start by a fuzzy idea, and then I would put it down in a visual, and then I would understand that the visual is actually wrong. But I would only come up to that realization after I visualize it. And so every, let's say, graph you see on the blog is usually the 6th or 7th iteration of that. And sort of reaching that understanding only comes after that iteration. And a lot of the times it takes quite a while, months. Illustrated Transformer took maybe 6 weeks. Illustrated Stable Diffusion was like 2 months. And then, like, after you even publish it, you start to learn more from the feedback that sort of people give you. And so I had to do another set of that sort of corrected some of the concepts there. And so for me, yeah, the visuals come very, very, very early in the process, especially these conceptual visualizations. You know, figures can also be, yeah, the bar plots or things that explain the data. That's let's say a different kind of, but the conceptual explanatory of how the different parts of the system work or operate are really, in the beginning, a map for me to understand, and then with the refinement, it can also become a map that is useful for other people. And then when it's time for, let's say, marketing the work, yeah, visuals attract people's attention on social media. So if you're posting a LinkedIn post or Twitter, if it has a visual, people will most likely see it that might have missed it if it's just text. If you have an animation, oh, that's even better. If things are moving and things are sort of that will also give you sort of a little bit more. So they have very high educational value, but also in terms of solidifying your own understanding for me, even when writing the book. Like in the beginning, a lot of the chapters, the Google Doc is 5 images, and then that I expand into 10, 20 images, and then start writing the text between them, because let's say that's the story. Let's say in my mind, that's a little bit more. That's why we ended up with like 300 figures in a book. But then, like the educational part, I find even for specialists, like you find even like NLP researchers, you find somebody who's, let's say, incredible at, let's say, mixture of experts, but then when just they want to start with pre-training, that's a whole other, let's say, thing, even if they're in the same, let's say, domain. And so if they come across, let's say, pre-training papers that also have some education in them, that can also have value for other deep NLP experts. But just because of how wide the domain is, people can be in pre-training or SFT or mixer or different architectures or data or analysis or safety. Other people with PhDs in the same field would appreciate whatever educational value that can happen in these papers, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I also find it very interesting that you said you start your book essentially with these visualizations, and then you go by adding text. I also like think similarly. Like when I want to write a paper, like I think about the visual elements first. and then write the text around it. I think it also like might be different from people to people, but there's a certain abstraction happening in visualizing a complex pipeline or like a model or whatever you are trying to communicate, that for that abstraction, you just kind of similar to like the Twitter thread maybe, or like you have to throw away like things that are distracting, that are not important, and then just really focusing on what is impactful, what is important, what is you want to tell the reader about. And that's really like a good one view of just understanding the work. What do you think, Shayne?
I agree that I think the visual aspect is probably the most fun part. Like, it's where you get to really bring your work to life. And I cannot, I mean, nowhere near as good as Jay, but I have some visualizations I want to show. They don't bring the same sort of like sequence narrative to life of like, here are the steps of Transformer. But when people are building visualizations for their paper, even if it's a simple table, a bar chart, whatever it is, I think there's a lot that researchers can do to just communicate one message from each figure and make it stand out so the person isn't having to read or look for it or try to figure out why they're looking at this plot. And I think that goes a really long way, because most people nowadays read papers by reading the figures, and you want to make that as easy as possible. So let me share my screen really quickly. There's a couple that I just want to illustrate. So this is a table on the 40th page, deep in the appendix of the pre-trainer's guide work. But the point of this is that just to make it easier to show the trends, like spend the time just to highlight the colors in the table for like the most important column. We're communicating that, the average, and we're communicating the trends of what's positive, what's negative, really easily. And that's minimal extra work just to bring this like otherwise very boring table of numbers to life that most people, they're just going to read all these like acronyms and be like, what on earth is this? Instead, they can maybe read a sentence, see a trend, move on. Another one it's the main message of the Flan collection work, put on the front page of the paper. People are doing that more now. And this is a bar chart, but by adding this little like plus number in green to the top, people's eyes immediately go to that. They just take away that message, and they're immediately, okay, so compared to the baselines, it's better. And then like, it just makes it so much easier to sort of figure out what's going on. Here's our recent data provenance work. And this is communicating a ton of information in one space, but at least we sort of add like, we annotate the diagrams to like add a little bit of info to make it a little bit easier, rather than just like leaving it to this and to like text or something. Like, just try to add a little bit of info onto the plot wherever you can. And the last piece is, if you're doing a table, it's so easy to take one and just make it, very simple set of checkboxes, and like so boring and so drab. Like, science does not have to be that boring. This is still very boring, but like, just add some color, add, logos, whatever it is, separate things, just put a little bit of effort. I think this is on like Canva, to, bring some stuff to light a little bit. And I think it goes a really long way in making people want to engage with the work. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share. I think the main message is try to communicate one key thing from each plot or figure. Don't try to just throw all the information there and hope people will like rigorously analyze every piece of it.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I think it's, especially when you spend a few months focus on one project, all of the details, and you might not understand how complex your plots are, or like some of the details. And readers do need some hand-holding. Like, you have to guide them into, like Shayne said, with like annotations to just like what they should be focusing on, and what maybe like is the important takeaway for a plot. I do want to ask how I think an important question in this aspect is, what are your recommendations for actually not doing it in the worst way possible, and that is essentially miscommunicating finding by the way you visualize. Like, because that can also happen. Like you can bend things and change things in how you are either like the scale, the axis, the like what you highlight or not. Like maybe like the differences might be smaller than they actually are, things like that. So how to make sure that you are communicating, you are highlighting the scientifically correct information, and you are not falling into the trap of maybe doing it too much.
Yeah, like a couple of just also reactions, I think, to this question, and then let's say the previous discussion. So yes, like when you're crafting visualizations, you have a tool set, and data visualization is a deep field on its own with a lot of its research. I think it's fascinating thing to sort of read, but you're guiding attention, and you have tools to guide the attention of the user. You can use, just as Shayne showed, color, the size, contrast, font. It's good to have a sense for all of these and sort of the hierarchy of which to use them. Of, I want the user to first look at this, and then this, and then that part. And so there, placement, the location on the figure. The eyes are, if you're reading in English, are used to going from the top to the bottom, left to the right, and so different areas have different importance, and you can guide that attention by having something pop in the beginning with a very clear, let's say, color, and then using grayscale or scales of color. That can be sort of useful to say, okay, notice this, then notice this, then notice that. And one thing that can be miscommunicated or is if there's too much for people to, let's say, that's one pitfall, I would say, of there's too much for people to grasp or to break down, or there are so many ideas or pieces of information on one figure. That would probably be one of the most common ones. But then there are also other ways of lying with the data, or overemphasizing things, or having a bar chart where it starts with the grading side, the scale starts from, let's say, 30 to, let's say, 32, and then you're saying, like, see, our work is so much better than this other work, and the difference is 2 points. Like, there are ways that you see people sort of using to emphasize some of these, but the readers might not sort of identify that that's what they're. And just to address one comment that you've sort of mentioned in the past, yes, there's in communication, there's ideas in papers that will have to be dense, but then there's the guiding in terms of which ideas are one figure can be broken down into 6 figures a lot of the time. If you explain, this is the main first idea, this is the second main idea, this is the third main idea. And that's one thing where the Twitter thread can help to explain that one central figure for the paper.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good, like, breaking things down. It's generally, and like you realize if you are doing too much, like, and you can just like merge back again. But I also find a lot of times I start with one plot, which can be better showcased in at least like 2 subplots. Like, it's not, again, going back to simplicity being important to communicating, and like each plot, kind of like what Jay said, like one Twitter thread, like one tweet and like one takeaway, so that it's not, it's very easy to understand and hard to miscommunicate. We did mention a lot of also like interesting things about like colors, contrast, annotations, scales. I think these are really important points. I just wanted to share, I use this website, which is a nice one for 2 things. So one is I play around with the colors just to see like what colors go nice together. Like, it's not, we are ML researchers, we are not really artists, but it helps to, for me personally, to see, oh, if I want to use like these 4 colors in the paper, how do they look like in just like one block? And then play around, change colors to find some things that I find aesthetically pleasing. And there are also like aspects of, like, for instance, what is a good set of colors for colorblind people, or and there are like different types of color blindness. Like it, essentially using tools for areas that you are not really an expert in, and understandably to just improve the way you visualize. Are there other tools that you guys are using and you think can be useful for people?
It's funny. That was the question I was about to ask. I was like, I'd love to hear what Jay and you were using, Marzieh. I feel like I'm behind the times. I'm using like a mix of Matplotlib, Altair, and I definitely use some tools. I forget what they are. Like I'm Googling, what goes well with these different ones. We also have a designer on our team, so I'm checking in with her frequently. Let me think for a second. I don't know if there's anything out of the box that I use that's unexpected. Yeah, you should go first.
Okay, so I live by Apple Keynote. That's where I think it's an extension of my brain. Definitely, there's tools around color. I use it for animation. It's important for whatever you use to be easy and simple, and you can sort of do a lot of things and iterations quickly. I started out using, let's say, much more difficult tools for a lot of these things, and I can sort of share some of the things that are useful for me in that flow. So, for example, this is, let's say, one figure from the book where we explain how a language model is trained. So this is how you come up with, let's say, the most cutting edge models. You start with an untrained model, you go through base training, you have instruction tuning, and then you have preference tuning. These are generally the steps. And then you can see how colors sort of used a little bit here to indicate, you go from something with less contrast to something very colorful, and then something that's even more colorful. So you guide that a little bit there. And to use that, like a lot of these figures for me start with a box like this, and then I would go to my list of colors here on the side. And so this is a color palette that is very useful. You can see it has 10 or 12 hues, and each hue has a lot of these different colors. So if I'm going to do something with, let's say, amber, I can easily say, okay, this is going to be the first one, and then this is going to be the second one. Let's say you go to 300, and then you go to 600. And you can find these palettes sort of online and download them into this. And since this one doesn't have enough contrast with the background, it would be like, okay, let's give them also a border that would have less contrast there as well. So that's one of the main tools. And I have a video on YouTube that sort of explains a little bit of how to do this and how to do things like vectors. So how do you sort of represent a vector, which for me tend to be a small table like this, which then I would color. Let's say this would be 2 by 3 or 3 by 1, and then just add the different color it in like this or like this, and then that's the visual language of this is a vector that will then go through this layer or to another layer, and slowly you start to build the visual language that is
nice. And I can imagine also, like, the more you do this, like the better you get at just like what works, what will look like what. And yeah, nice, cool. I do want to also briefly, before getting to questions from the audience, talk about another dimension of communication, and that's oral communication and presentation. So you both have been giving talks at conferences at different places. So what is your general approach when you want to present your work at a conference or like, a general audience?
Want to go first, Shayne?
Sure. Maybe I'll quickly say a few words about poster sessions, because I feel like so many students are very familiar with those. And I feel like the more experienced community like just realizes something like they could tell their younger selves like again and again. Delete the text. Stop using as much text. You have 80% too much text in your posters. Create visual representations for them. I'd even go so far as to say you should never have 3 consecutive sentences. That might be a little bit extreme, but I just think, and I violate this for some of my posters for sure, but like everything should be visual aids. It's a pitch, it's an advertisement for the work, for them to read your paper. It's not for them to like stand there and read the paper off the board. People don't, they want to talk to you. They want to hear your thoughts, and they want to like grasp why they should be interested in this. So I think at a poster session, when you have visual aids, and this is like a key form of academic oral presentation, delete all the text, use massive figures, and just concentrate around the two key ideas. And then like have a sequence, a narrative that you can talk through. Maybe like Jay said, like 1, 2, 3, 4, like figures that take you through a sequence that you can point to, and everyone goes in that journey. But it's easy to grasp when they're on poster 55 of that morning, trying to figure out whether they care or not. Otherwise, for oral presentations, same thing for slides. Delete your text, make it simple as possible. Use boxes to show the part you're talking about. I like to use animations to bring pieces up one by one. Maybe I'll quickly share my screen because I have some slides up now. Like sometimes all you need is just like the figure itself with like a thing at the bottom that tells you why it's important. I like to start by sort of motivating, certain problems with like high level text, show figures that one by one sort of appear that you can talk through. Again, it's probably too much text. It should be like 2 words each. And then take things like this and animate them slowly throughout, where if there is text, you're not imagining people are going to talk or read all of it. They're listening to you, but they can quickly scan and get an idea from what you're saying, what's important and what's not important. I think the last thing to say about a good presentation is try it on your friends, try it on your colleagues, like run it a few times through. It helps you get feedback, but also just the smoothness of it really helps with the engagement.
Yeah, for posters, I think many researchers have probably seen this, but the idea of the better poster is something that they absolutely love. And you start to see these, and some people don't know that there's a name associated exactly with this kind of a poster design, where it's, one big block of color, your main ideas go here. And that's the sentence that sort of Shayne was mentioning earlier, that one sort of killer, let's say, pitch. And when you go around, when people are browsing, it's very sort of easy to grab people's attention and to sort of draw them to the work here with this one. And you can just search this hashtag better poster, and you can see a lot of examples on Twitter for how people took this design in different ways for the poster presentation. Or in talking with people, like the style for me generally is thinking that I'm talking with one person and sort of using that language is very conversational. The slides would be also highly visual, very little text, no bullet points, that sort of explain things. If I would show bullet points, I would show them one by one, or just say stream them in, and they would have as little text as possible. And so a lot of my talks are 60 or 70 slides, because each one I just breathe through. I'm speaking through it, and it's just there to sort of help people understand that idea, rather than for them to read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is actually, thanks both. I think very, very helpful. And I also want to bring back a point Shayne had earlier, which I think in oral presentation works well, is engaging people, like asking questions for the audience and see like how many of you are like speaking like multiple languages. Like these sorts of very simple questions, I find it awakens people, like if they are just like in a slumber of just like how after like a few talks at the conference, for instance, and get them just engaged with the work, and then hopefully stays with your presentation a bit more. And I think, well, both of you have also been doing that quite well. And I think sharing these resources online is also very helpful. So like whatever poster, presentation slides, blog posts, like things like that, of course, just building your portfolio of different ways that you are presenting things. I think that's also something that will help communicate your research interest and like what you have been doing. So it's not really, I never look at like a poster or a slide as just like something to present at one venue and then be done. It can also be your shared multiple times to get more audience. There is a question in the chat about giving talks actually. So how do you go about replying to questions you don't know the answer to about your work? Have that happened to you before?
That's interesting. That phrase is very is commonly used, and I'm using it in the same time. I guess a lot of it is asking questions again, and probably understanding more of the ask of the person asking it and sort of where they're coming from. But it's, I don't know, it's a general sort of topic.
That's a great answer, but I'd also say just be honest and say you don't know. There seems to be this weird pressure in academia where, especially if it's interviews or job talks or things, people want to like pretend they have an idea or have thought about it. Like sometimes you just don't know, and that's fine. Like you're still probably the biggest expert on, you know, the research that you've done or that particular component of it. And people can tell when you don't know. So.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's no one is judging you for just like not doing everything essentially, but it's also I think the more you talk about your work and like get feedback from different people, you also can like probably can be able to identify these like gaps of, oh, this is someone has been interested in that like multiple times and you don't know about that, so like maybe that's also something to study. But I also agree it shouldn't be really a bad thing to say, oh, I don't know, or we should check the details, like things like that. It are very valid answers. So the next question from the audience is, I think we briefly talked about it, but maybe, so there's, how do you think about the initial visualize? Do you try to map the code to visual from the paper that you try to come up with? I guess like the question is about the first visualization of your work. Like how do you go from directly to code, or like what is your process?
Like that initial visual in the paper, I guess.
I think so, yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, would be interested to hear from Shayne. Like, there would be multiple candidates, I guess. So one of them is, which one would you want to show? Like, and it depends if the work is showing a new architecture. It would be different from somebody who's showing, let's say, results or a comparison of performance on a specific task. I think that will definitely draw from exactly where the image is. But you know, starting with having a sense of what's out there in the field and what visual language sort of people use is quite useful. And if I were to show one example that stood with me for maybe 4 years now, I don't know how many of you saw this. So one visual from the T5 paper that sort of was very clearly iconic and sort of branded a specific paper is kind of like this. And in your domain or in the ideas, discussing the ideas that you come across, these might serve as a good jumping off point that you say, assuming you know there's something similar sort of that comes across it. So, but that's for the conceptual visuals. For let's say plots, it would be perhaps a different approach.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Nice. So the last question of the session, I know it's 1 hour already, and I've been really enjoying chatting with you, but we have to wrap up soon. So I want to ask both of you, is there a person or a paper whose communication style you really find inspiring and that has influenced you throughout your work? And you cannot say yourself or each other. Let's think about like someone else.
Personally, I've benefited a lot from just science communicators. Like growing up, these are people like Carl Sagan and Richard Feynman. In ML, it's been people like Andrej Karpathy and his blog, Chris Olah. And then people I've had the pleasure of collaborating with that explain a lot of these concepts. Luis Serrano, Martin Hotendorst, my co-author, has been sort of doing incredible visualizations also on his blog for a lot of these concepts. And my colleague in Cohere, Mior Amr, as well, are some of the best sort of visual explainers of concepts I've learned a lot from over the years.
That's a hard list to follow, especially if I have to deduplicate, but I'll try my best. To one person that's phenomenal and very related to Cohere at just communicating and framing messages, Sarah Hooker can just cut to the heart of work. And I honestly, half the time when we do work together, I'm like, can you write the introduction? Or you want to write the abstract? Like, just, I don't even want to look at it until you've taken a first pass, because it sort of opens you up to a new way of thinking about things. And it's funny that you mentioned also the T5 paper. I think Colin Raffel is very good at communicating things. Sebastian Reuter has his like blog that's cuts to the heart of what's going on in the ecosystem and developments. I don't know if he's still doing it, but that always, I'd look forward to that every few months or whatever it was. For a more junior person, I work with Nicholas Morninghoff. He does some scaling law work. His papers are beautiful. Also great visualizations in Hannah Kirk-Rose's recent work. They're like very complex, but she has these matplotlib, like Jupyter notebooks that are so long because the matplotlib file code is like pages long, and it produces these like super detailed, comprehensive visualizations that are really interesting.
Yeah, these are great, and I'm not gonna go after both of these lists. You cover a lot of the same people that I wanted to mention, like Sarah, Andrej Karpathy, Chris Olah. Like these have been also like very influential in my career in just like the importance of good communication, like effective scientific communication. I also do want to mention that my background, essentially I started my PhD 2014, end of 2014 on machine translation, and papers on neural networks and machine translations were coming out 2014. So the first year of my PhD, I was reading the RNN paper, the attention on top of RNN, then the transformer paper. And the introduction of neural network to a field of statistical machine translation was very fascinating, how some of these papers really spent time on visualizing these neural networks quite well. And from that point, for me, it was a very that was for me like the point that I thought, oh, visualization of this is really important. Like very easily a paper on attention can be much more memorable and effective just because of a nice and simple visualization. So I think the early MT work for me, that was very impactful as well. All right, so we are at the time. There are some really nice, useful links in the chat. Ariel J has been sharing some. Check those out. I wanna give another really warm thanks to both Shayne and Jay. Really enjoyed this talk today. Thanks for joining me. And I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience also learned a lot. And it was really lovely talking to both of you. I'll hope to see you around. And we have these sessions. We will put them on YouTube, so you can check them out also later if you missed them.
Thanks so much, Marzieh. Great to chat with you too.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the audience. If any of you write things, post them, send them our way. We'd be happy to, spread the word and, give you any feedback if you'd like.
Great. Thank you. And thanks, Ariel, for organizing this. All right. I hope everyone have a good day. And for another session, we'll see you soon. Bye.